Well, right now, firefighters are tackling a stubborn wildfire that's forced the evacuation of 2 communities. The Silver Creek fire has now consumed more than 10,500 acres between Rabbit Ears Pass and Kremling. It started back in July, but now more than 200 people living in the Old Park and Gore Lakes neighborhoods are out of their homes this weekend. And this is why. Shifting winds carry the flames from tree to tree. The fire is only 35% contained. Firefighters say the blaze is active on 2 fronts, and it is burning through Buffalo Park and is now within 2 miles of U.S. Highway 40. It's burning heavily on the Red Dirt Reservoir side also. Lightning sparked that fire.
When a home garden becomes a big part of your lifestyle.
This was a delight. People used to come here and see these fish, and those ponds were full.
A drought can have a devastating impact, not just on the vegetation.
Yeah, this plant here, which was huge, has just basically died out.
But in Rodney Swansborough's case, on your way of life.
When you're living in that sort of environment, which you're not used to doing, that really is very confronting.
Rodney and the rest of the less than 900 people who live in the rural New South Wales town of Murunda are facing critical water restrictions. That means no watering gardens.
Can't wash a car, can't hose down our concrete or a veranda or anything like that.
Even showers need to be kept to just 3 minutes. That's because Murunda...
full level is 8.4 metres right here. So, yeah, we'd be nearly up to our shoulders in water.
...is running out of water. The usually full dam has just 3 months left before it runs dry.
Murunda isn't the only town that's in crisis as well. So it doesn't just affect farmers, it affects every other livelihood as well.
The worst drought in more than half a century now extends into 3 states. It's turned once fertile land into dust bowls and pushed animals into areas where they normally wouldn't venture in search of water. Farmers are struggling to keep livestock alive.
Breaks my heart that people can't offload them. They're just dying in the paddock.
Many farmers are now forced to feed their animals that are no longer able to graze on the dried up land.
It's been a huge financial effect on everyone, not just buying hay and things like that, but you know, we've got no winter crop.
The drought also appears to be bringing out the best in people. The owner of this trailer, who didn't want to appear on camera, has driven here from Sydney. He's got another 40 minutes to go, a total of 5 hours one way to deliver this hay to farmers in need. The costs coming out of his own pocket. Others are traveling hundreds of kilometers to donate supplies to drought-stricken communities. Murunda may have found a temporary solution to its water crisis, but town officials say it won't last.
That's a pretty serious thing to have happen, is to think that your water supply is subject to, you know, perhaps drying up pretty soon.
And with the usually hot, dry summer just months away, the outlook for many communities here is grim.
Now a tropical depression, the remnants of Hurricane Florence are still lashing the Carolinas.
What we're dealing with is probably the most catastrophic disaster that this county has seen in the last 50 or 60 years.
The powerful storm and heavy rain leaving more than 500,000 in the dark and prompting hundreds of water rescues, like this mother and baby saved by the Coast Guard.
We got you, Phil. No rush.
But in Wilmington, North Carolina, firefighters prayed outside the scene where a mother and her 8-month-old were killed when a tree crashed into their home Friday. The injured father was taken to the hospital. Today, teams like the National Guard, the U.S. Marine Corps, and volunteer groups like the Cajun Navy and the New York Fire Department are all on the scene.
When you can help your fellow man, when you can get out there and do what you're trained to do, that's a great thing.
North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis says the economic impact on the Tar Heel state will be long-lasting.
The agriculture industry, the largest industry in our state, is hard hit. We're going to have to sort out the crop damage.
The federal government saying the recovery process will take a full team effort.
It's locally executed, state-managed, federally supported, and that's the model that we shoot for.
Also warning other states to beware as the effects of Florence continue inland.
We're also anticipating you're about to see a lot of damage going through West Virginia all the way up to Ohio as this system exits out.
President Trump says he's pleased with the comprehensive recovery response so far, tweeting, FEMA First responders and law enforcement are working really hard on Hurricane Florence. As the storm begins to finally recede, they will kick into an even higher gear. Now, the president has been in touch with local officials throughout the disaster, and the White House says he will travel to impacted areas as soon as they determine that his travel will not disrupt recovery efforts.
Business Insider reports that Philippine and Chinese authorities say the death toll from Typhoon Mangkhut has risen to at least 69, and dozens are still missing. Mangkhut weakened to a tropical storm as it moved deeper into southern China, where rain and strong winds were expected to continue through Tuesday. A Philippine National Police report said the death toll as of Monday midday was 65, with 43 people missing and 64 injured. Chinese authorities reported 4 deaths from falling trees and building materials in Guangdong, China's manufacturing hub.
Overdue, but not enough. That is how sex abuse victims of Catholic priests describe the new addition of 8 priests to the sexual predator list. The San Diego Diocese made this decision late yesterday. 10 News reporter Travis Rice is in Chula Vista with what one victim thinks of the diocese response.
The diocese says one of the priests on that list molested an altar boy here at Our Most Precious Blood in 1977. That priest, along with 7 others, are the newest additions to the predator priest list in 11 years. The clerical sex abuse scandal is growing gradually in San Diego. These are the names of the 8 clergymen believed to have molested children. According to the diocese, they've been added to their sexual predator list. The diocese established the list from a legal case in 2007 after 144 claims of child sexual abuse by 48 priests. To settle the case, the San Diego Diocese paid out $198 million.
I was molested and raped at the church that I went to.
Paul Livingston is the director of the Survivors Network of those abused by priests.
They knew about him in 2007 when they were in bankruptcy court. They should have taken care of him then. There's probably, I know of another 100 victims that have come forward since the 2007 settlements. So, I mean, it hasn't stopped. It's still going on.
The 8 new names were with the church from the late 60s to the early 2000s and had been accused since 2007. The diocese has not immediately clarified why it took so long for them to be added to the list.
The only time it's going to stop is when bishops and cardinals end up in prison. Period.
This survivor says this is a step towards justice, but a baby step, and he believes it's going to take a lot more for this situation to be rectified for other victims.
God, an act of God.
The diocese says starting next month they will hold 8 separate public forums throughout San Diego County on the sex abuse scandals. In Chula Vista, Travis Rice, 10 News.
We have reached out to the San Diego Diocese on the matter, and they say they are still fine-tuning their statement.
As church let out at St. Charles in North Hollywood, parishioners weren't just greeted by clergy, they were confronted by protesters silently soliciting change within the Catholic Church.
I don't want to give an opinion. Thanks.
Although most leaving didn't want to talk about the sex abuse scandal that still haunts the Archdiocese, others admit it haunts them too.
My biggest loss is that he lost his faith, and that is what hurts.
Marty Valdez says her son went to school with some of the victims.
Thoughts and prayers anywhere are not enough.
Organizers of today's demonstration are demanding more, specifically targeting Cardinal Roger Mahony.
We want the Attorney General to start a grand jury investigation on criminal behavior of Mahony.
Although some protesters are conflicted about possible criminal action, they don't think he should still be a cardinal.
To see Cardinal Mahony start giving Mass again has infuriated me and many of my friends.
Mahony was never convicted of a crime, but admitted he knew of sexual abuse and didn't call police.
Back then, that isn't the way these matters were approached.
But it is now. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles has since instituted a zero-tolerance policy towards abuse.
In this day and age, our church has very strict policies. When a report comes in, they're immediately reported to the police.
Cardinal Mahony is officially retired, but according to the Archdiocese, sometimes, like any other priest in good standing, he is asked to fill in at parishes throughout Los Angeles.
People will avoid going to get in line when he passes out communion.
Which is why organizers today say their informational picket will continue, not to hurt the church, but to heal it.
On a visit to Sicily, the Pope has told Catholics that if they don't trust a priest, they should tell him why. Francis flew to Palermo to mark the 25th anniversary of a priest who was assassinated by the mafia. The visit comes as pressure mounts on Francis to say what he knew about previous sexual misconduct of a US cardinal before he was stripped of his rank. Some young people say they trust God, but they don't trust the church. When you ask them why, they say they're mangia preti, meaning they don't like priests. So if you are mangia preti, go to the priest and tell him directly, I don't trust you because of this, or that. Pope Francis was greeted with warmth and enthusiasm in Sicily, but it's against a backdrop of a Catholic Church battered by revelations that many priests and bishops sexually abused children or protected the abusers.
These are the statistics, too, of the freshman class at Yale. 9% of students, 9% of students identify as conservative. That's compared, remember, to 36% of American adults overall who identify as conservatives. 22, anywhere between 22 and 25, depending on how you want to count it. We'll just go with the low number, to be fair here. 22% of the students are LGBTQ. When I see this, the first thing that I think of is this is the culture of political correctness that the left has been promoting, where if you identify or portray yourself as a victim, you actually, that's advantageous to you socially. It's almost, they encourage people to identify in ways that would make them feel that they are an oppressed person or in a protected group because it gets them further along than just traditional people.
Oh, exactly. And this is something that we've known for years now. I mean, we've come to accept as rote and as axiomatic truth in the conservative movement that big state colleges, that big popular liberal-leaning private colleges, these are indoctrination centers and daycares for kids who are going to learn a lot about things like Marxist conflict theory and white privilege and underwater gender theory and all these other different things without really diving into things like objective truth and virtue and the classical mind and things like that, where you will get them at other colleges. And I think, if I were a Yale administrator, if I were somebody at Yale University or any of these other colleges that are seeing numbers like this, not being a product of this kind of system, would say, look, why in the world do we have this sort of disparity that doesn't match up with the rest of the world outside of here? And is this something that we're proud of? And is this something that we want to continue? Or is this something that we need to find out and how to rectify? Is this an advertising problem? Are we scaring conservatives away before they even apply to these places? Or are we weeding them out through discrimination in the application process? Or are we chasing them off after we get here, which is not addressed by these statistics, but a legitimate question?
Right. Well, I think it would probably be all of the above. I mean, the reason that they do this is for indoctrination purposes. They don't just want to equip young people to explore different academic disciplines or explore different philosophies. They want to indoctrinate students in a radical leftist ideology so that then the students take that off campus and disseminate it. So perhaps all of the above applies. It drives conservatives away because no conservative says, oh, I want to endure 4 years of indoctrination just so I can get a job after college.
This is a regular scene at Sabah Hospital in South Sudan's capital, Juba. Children suffering from severe malnutrition come to this ward every day to be treated. One of them is Agnes Arash's baby girl.
He's been sick since he was 6 months. I tried to feed him, but where will I find food? You have to buy food here in Juba. You can't farm. If there was money, I'd buy food to feed my kids. If not, we go to bed hungry.
Agnes's daughter is just one of the hundreds of thousands of children UNICEF says are suffering from severe malnutrition here. 5 years of civil war has left 7 million South Sudanese relying on relief supplies. Tens of thousands have been killed since President Salva Kiir accused his then Vice President Riek Machar of attempting a coup. The war-ruined economy makes daily meals unaffordable to many, including millions of children.
Since the outbreak of war in 2013, we have never seen this number before. In 2018, we estimated 270,000 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. This is a huge number, and if we don't respond quickly, we will lose all these children.
But aid groups have complained repeatedly to the government about being blocked from reaching those in need by the warring sides. The latest peace deal has been signed to end the fighting, and pledges made to allow humanitarian access. Witnesses to the signing say much needs to be done to ensure that happens safely.
With the signing of this revitalized agreement, we should publicly acknowledge it is but one step on the road to peace, but one which lays the foundation for all that follows.
Agnes hopes that the peace deal works so she doesn't lose her child to hunger, a hope shared by many mothers whose children are starving. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera.
It's an airstrike by the Saudi UAE-led coalition. Whatever the target may have been, this is the result. Civilians searching for missing children. It isn't a rescue. They find one dead child. What's his guilt? Why has he been killed, says one of the men who had earlier rescued the child's mother. The father wasn't in his home when the bomb hit. The girl's name is Samoud Sida. She's carried away by one of the helpers. He knows it doesn't end here. The searching continues, and Samoud's brother Nabil is recovered. It's what everyone had dreaded. 2 dead children. These are civilians. Their little kids are the only words this man can manage. It happened on Saturday in Maran, in Sada province, which shares a border with Saudi Arabia. These people are internally displaced, having fled the fighting. Yemen's turmoil is a lethal mix of the tactics of warfare, the tactics of diplomacy for negotiations that could be attached with that, and a humanitarian crisis. The fighting isn't just on the battlefield. The suffering goes right across Yemen, and it's getting worse. In the stillness of a remote village in Hajjah province, they're eating the leaves of trees to survive. They're cooked and mashed into a paste.
Personally, I don't eat the leaves, but since my salary has been cut, it's the main meal for my children, even though this is causing them itchiness and drowsiness. But what can we do?
We cook tree leaves. We have no nutrition. We will die here. We have no one but God.
This is the nearest medical center to the village where they had to resort to eating leaves. Malnutrition could end up being the biggest killer in this conflict. Anyone trying to bring peace to Yemen may not need reminding of what's at stake. Nevertheless, those without a voice of influence are crying out for help now more than ever before.
Political divisions at government level within the European Union will lead to more refugee deaths in the Mediterranean. Experts at a conference in Brussels have warned. Rights groups accuse the European Union of failing in its legal and moral responsibilities by creating a fortress Europe to keep refugees out. Press TV's Jerome Hughes has our story.
So far this year, 1,565 refugees have died in the Mediterranean as they desperately attempted to reach European Union shores. Anti-immigrant political parties are now in government in many EU countries, including Italy, which has been a key entry point for refugees. This conference in Brussels has been discussing controversial plans being pursued by the EU. The idea is to seize refugee vessels at sea, bring the refugees to centres in African countries, and then determine who qualifies for refugee status back in the EU. Experts are concerned African countries might not cooperate due to a lack of unity on display within the EU.
This divided Europe doesn't help to entertain a genuine on the one side and a trustful dialogue with the other side of the Mediterranean. So it doesn't help because Nobody is empowered to talk on behalf of all the member states as such, because it's also a foreign affairs policy.
Key questions remain unanswered regarding how the EU-funded plan to transport refugees to Africa will actually work.
Will I have to, if I am a migrant and willing to come to Europe, be rescued at sea to be brought back to these centres? How will I access them by land? Will they be accessible? And how will relocation and how will the relocation process work in practice?
Rights groups say the EU is cowardly, outsourcing its responsibilities to Africa and Turkey, and is creating a fortress Europe. Just this week, the EU Commission unveiled plans to create a 10,000-strong armed border force designed to block asylum seekers from entering the EU. There is also criticism of how the EU is treating refugees who have successfully reached the bloc, for example in Greece. Oxfam says a record number of 20,110 refugees are currently trapped on the Greek islands. Those include children, pregnant women and people with mental health problems. They are surviving in trailers and tents and have limited access to essential services, including water. Oxfam says many have to wait for more than 10 months before authorities inform them of their fate.
The attack occurred in 5 villages in Newman local government area of Adamawa State. 51 persons, including a Lutheran church pastor, were killed. Eyewitnesses say suspected Fulani herdsmen launched the attack from neighboring Taraba State. They burnt down 3 villages. Some villagers, mostly women and children who were fleeing the attacks, died when their boat capsized. The police in Adamawa says those responsible for the attacks are being pursued and they would face the full wrath of the law once apprehended. According to the 2014 Global Terrorism Index, Fulani militants were the 4th deadliest terrorist group, using machine guns and attacks on villages to assault and intimidate farmers. Thousands have been killed across Nigeria in communal clashes over land resources.
Explosions rocked the Damascus airport in Syria late last night. Pro-regime sources say that Syrian air defense batteries shot down a large flurry of attempted airstrikes, which most accuse Israel of leading this affront. And this alleged attack is said to have targeted an Iranian shipment of weapons and storage facilities. If true, this indeed would be a prime target for Israeli forces.
At this time, it remains unclear just how much damage was done in the attack. As per military policy, the IDF has neither confirmed nor denied any involvement here. Now, having said that, military spokesman only weeks ago confirmed that Israel had conducted some 200 airstrikes throughout Syria in recent years. And this latest incident would certainly follow similar strategies allegedly used by the Israeli Air Force in the past. Reports suggest that this round of attacks focused primarily on 2 targets: an Iranian plane carrying weapons that had just landed in Damascus from Tehran, and a series of storage rooms at Damascus airport believed to be storing weapons. But most troubling of all is one report that suggests that these rooms were labeled with United Nations or DHL mail service logos. If correct, this would suggest a clear and concerted effort to thwart Israeli efforts and sneak under the radar. With the Syrian civil war largely coming to a close following 7 bloody years, Israeli leaders have promised to do everything in their power to keep Iran from claiming a foothold in the destabilized region. Presuming this latest airstrike was indeed the work of the Israeli military, it would demonstrate the army's willingness to make good on that threat.
The UN Security Council is set to hold an urgent meeting on Monday over certain member states trying to block the implementation of North Korea sanctions. The U.S. called for the meeting last week, a day after U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley released a statement accusing Russia of interfering with an independent UN report on the implementation of North Korea sanctions. Haley claims Russia pressured the independent panel to alter its report because it included sanctions violations that implicated Russian actors. She said she's disappointed the panel caved to Russia's pressure. Haley also said Russia can't be allowed to interfere with independent UN reports, quote, just because they don't like what they say, period. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made similar accusations last week. UN Security Council members will discuss the implementation and enforcement of North Korea sanctions at Monday's meeting.
They say home is where the heart is, and it's moving day for this little one.
It's amazing.
This is one baby with a very special heart. Penelope Wilkins was born with hers on the outside of her body. Now, after 9 months of recovery and multiple surgeries, she's being allowed to visit her home for the first time. Vanellope was born in November 2017 in the UK. Doctors gave her less than a 10% chance of survival. Her mom, Naomi, was in the early stages of pregnancy when she found out about her daughter's condition. She says doctors urged her to abort, but she refused. Vanellope's breastbone failed to develop normally. She had what's called ectopia cordis, a congenital defect in which the heart is located in an unusual place, either partially or completely outside the normal midsection of the body. Vanellope was set to be delivered almost a month earlier than her Christmas Eve due date. Minutes after she was born, via a C-section, Vanellope was rushed into surgery. Doctors say her unusual condition presents unique challenges.
It's quite difficult at this moment. There is no huge experience. Actually, more or less, there is no experience. So in the future, most likely, we just need to plan some reconstructive chest wall surgery, using her own cartilages or bones, or using some artificial materials.
Now, almost a year later, Vanellope is making the transition from hospital to home. Vanellope's stays are only temporary for the time being. The family's residence has been turned into a hospital of sorts to handle their daughter's delicate lifestyle. They're in the process of recreating a critical care environment until Vanellope can move home permanently.
To assess their child's breathing, if there's any change in that when they're in a home environment, to know when to escalate care, when to shout for help, and to manage emergency situations at home.
In the meantime, they've been learning how to manage the equipment. Looking back, it's been quite the journey.
That first day, what could have happened, you know, when she was born? I do still think that, and that's what keeps me going with her and how much more incredible she is. Knowing that she's fought all the way to be here.
Vanellope is believed to be the first baby born with her condition in the UK and to have lived.
We always knew it was rare, but how rare she is probably rarer than we thought.
Unbelievable odds for an unbelievable family.